Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the Marketing Association. Most people know me as the co-founder of Did It, a digital first uh, marketing agency with roots in search. And I also have a nonprofit called Giving Forward that does cause marketing and generates revenue for nonprofits, for other nonprofits. So I'm happy to be here with Andrew Wetzler today. Andrew's been involved in search almost as long as I have. He runs more visibility down in Boca. So thanks for joining me, Andrew.
Kevin, thank you for having me.
Um, Google's remained sort of top of mind on both the paid side, but particularly on the organic side over the last couple of years. Uh, One thing they do is they use the importance of search visibility to sort of force marketers to make changes to their web presence, right? So whether it's mobile first and now core web vitals, but just little nuances, they really sort of use themselves as a battering ram to get marketers to constantly be upgrading their websites. Do you feel like that they're fair? Do you feel like they should use their market power to essentially force marketers to constantly revisit websites so they're never done?
Well, personally, I think it's great in the sense that it keeps, folks like you and I, churning along and quite busy. But I think the answer, Kevin, goes back to the early days. And if you remember, we would go to the search engine strategies conferences out in San Jose. And the thing that you would hear at those conferences when you have this, the fireside chat with Sergey and Larry Page was it's all about the user experience. It's all about what Google is about, what makes it better for the end consumer who's going to be searching for something. So to me, everything that they've done from, knocking out the obvious, bad practices, black hat stuff in the early days to today, continuing to up the ante in terms of what someone has to do to make their website more appropriate for someone who's searching quickly, who wants to find information, who doesn't want to be led down a rabbit hole. I think that the goal continues to be just to make it a better experience. And most website owners today maybe aren't as proactive as they would be, or are not as proactive as they would be if they weren't getting a push from Google at the same time. So to me, like the core web vital things, like one of the core web vitals is that anything that loads on a page needs to like be kind of static and not bouncing around, so it's a horrible user experience. You and I have both read, been on plenty of websites where, that's highly distracting. So things like that to me are a win. But to your point, it's still a heavy-handed approach at times. And fortunately, firms like yours and mine can make a good impact in helping people.
Oh, well, certainly, I don't think either of us are complaining about the job security that comes with it. But we get to hear it, right, from clients when they, perhaps a previous CMO or previous VP of digital, thought that sort of it was done, right? And it was maybe only 5 years ago that they went mobile, they went responsive, right? And now that's just not good enough anymore, and they have to go back and maybe change CMS or do some serious HTML. So it is sort of, I think people have to think about it at the client side differently, right? They have to really think about the website as never being done.
Never being done, but I view that as an advantage. I really do, because if you go back to the, once again, the more traditional way of doing business, it was you'd print a brochure and you would, use that brochure until it was done, and then you'd reprint. The beauty of, digital is that nothing is set and everything can continue to, be tweaked and refined. Just the one thing that I'm hearing more complaints, if you will, today relative to what Google's doing is with the privacy stuff. With the cookies and the lacking the ability to track things the way you could in the old days. And I fully understand the importance of privacy and, ratcheting that up as well. But that's where I'm hearing more griping today than I am from just the ongoing incremental, moving the bar up that Google presents.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, Google is not the only company engaged in behavior which they maybe use the umbrella of privacy to justify. Right? Apple has made some changes recently, not just with IDFA, but with regards to being able to track email opens. And there's an entire email marketing industry. We do a fair amount of email as well. That they got spoiled with the ability to really understand exactly how well campaigns were performing. And a lot of that data is going to get much more fuzzy over time. Previous to digital, obviously, everyone had to figure out if their marketing was working in different ways. It's almost like Back to the Future from that perspective.
It's like you used to seed your database with fake names, and people should names from other that you list got abused in one other place, you'd know, because Aunt Sue in Omaha got a piece of mail she shouldn't have gotten.
Exactly. Obviously Google's been the sort of reigning champ. We got started in '96, so pre-Google, but it didn't take Google long to unseat Lycos and Alta Vista and Excite and all the other brand names that.
Can I show you something, Kevin? Hold
on. Sure.
This is my official Ask Jeeves bottle of wine that I've had sitting on my desk for, I don't know, 18, 20 years.
All right. Well,
one day we'll open it.
I was going to say, what would require the popping of the Ask Jeeves?
I don't know. Probably, I'm scared it's not going to be that good anymore.
Yeah, I would be scared. But and obviously Microsoft, who has a fair amount of resources, has been sort of trying to take share from Google for ages, not that successfully. And now you've got, some newer entrants like, DuckDuckGo, either by itself or the Brave browser. And Amazon had A9, but they ended up using most of that power just to power internal search, creating their own commerce search engine, essentially, that's super effective and efficient and relevant. So do you think Google has an Achilles heel? Do you think that there's somebody's going to come out? I mean, obviously IBM has things like Watson, but it's a non-trivial, challenge to launch a search engine. So do they have an Achilles heel?
Well, I think that time has proven that it's really, really hard to do, right? So many engines have come and gone. It's been much more stable over the last few years. But, in the early days, it was, Lycos and Discover and just all these things came fast and furious and couldn't gain traction and left. And I would say that Google's position and difficulty knocking them off could be viewed in the sense that of their failure to get into social, right? So they decided they wanted Google Plus, many years back to be their answer to Facebook, et cetera. And they couldn't make it happen because they couldn't build the mass and people didn't, buy in. So I think that their weakness in the social shows how hard it can be, and their strength in the search and their, just overall presence and everything will be very, very difficult anytime soon to knock off. Whether somehow in a political correctness kind of way, something happens that, gets the world against Google, I can't answer you, but I don't see anything slowing them down right now.
So for our SEO still and content, I guess earned media is what we call the entire division. For us now, we bought 3 PR agencies and do a fair amount of content marketing. There's organic social, unpaid social, of course, as well. And so the common denominator there is content. But, we find that, depending on which client it is and where they are in sort of their SEO life cycle, it could be on-page factors, it could be off-page factors, or it could be content that is sort of what's holding them back from the level of visibility that they want. Do you find sort of a common theme for the clients and prospects that you talk to as to which of those is their biggest problem?
Well, I think that the content's the biggest problem, right? It's you have to ongoing feed the machine, feed the beast. But I also think that, a lot of companies today, unfortunately, still have foundational issues with their website that are preventing them from doing as well as they could search. It could be things related to the core web values. It could be prior penalties. It could be, all different kinds of things. But I think that, just in terms of in terms of more visibility, the hardest position on an ongoing basis to fill is that really strategic writer who can help an organization understand their products and how best to communicate them through earned media channels in order to drive, traffic and revenue. So that, to me, tends to be the more Achilles heel than, the other stuff.
Yeah, I agree. That the content engine, feeding the content engine is absolutely key. And, it tends to be labor intensive, which is what scares people away, regardless of whether they're going to do it in-house or have, outsource it to folks like our agencies. But when they see what their competition is doing and how their competition is eating their lunch, that usually becomes a motivator.
They have no choice, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Because back to Google for a second. The other thing is that they still maintain church and state, right? So you can spend a gazillion bucks in paid and still be nowhere in organic. And I think that you need to hit both sides of it and do it effectively on an ongoing basis if you're really going to tackle it. And content's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on the paid side, Google similarly uses its market power to sort of force its version of what it thinks the web should be like on the paid side. It used to be that, if you wanted a completely different user experience for your paid landing pages, you could just isolate them, make them, ghost pages or disconnected from your navigation, and sort of deal with those and using a completely different user experience, remove navigation, things like that. And you can still do that, but of course, the quality score is become more of a black box, and that's a lever that Google likes to use, sometimes without a lot of clarity, to be honest, right, with regards to exactly why a quality score that used to be good has suddenly dropped. So it is really interesting to see how that same philosophy of user first has permeates Google on the paid side as well.
But and the other thing, this I guess is sort of the hybrid in Google sense is, they're putting a lot of results without you having to hit a website today, right? So if it's a question, if it's any sort of query where they can give you an answer right there before you even get to a website, particularly, I think that's having an impact in certain instances, because if you don't get the person to the site, then you can't necessarily get them to take the action step that you want. And if there's content above you that doesn't, that Google's just putting out there, I understand it ultimately comes from a website, but it's too easy for somebody to click on that and not make it down the page a little bit further.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the concentration of user activity in the top portion of the page is as bad or worse than it ever was. And I remember back when I was early in Sempo, I was on the founding board, and I was part of the first research committee that did some of these, hotspot and hot zone research studies. And they've changed somewhat with regards to exactly the shape of the hotspots, but it's still it's still super critical, or it makes such a huge difference if you could just move position into that hot zone organically, or you can afford it on a paid side, right? So that's where you have to be. It's almost zero-sum game to some extent, right? You're either in or you're out.
And it's just one other quick Google long time story is that if you remember way back before AdWords, you could buy listings, right? So for the first couple of years that we were around, we bought search engine optimization and search engine marketing for like $2,500 a year, some ridiculous number. And we were, right up there at the top before anything else for such a long time, until they woke up and said, there's a better way.
Yeah.
That was a good time though.
Yeah, of course. Well, they improved upon what GoTo had in Overture, right? Which was the flat, the flat auction that was fully transparent, and went to the second price auction and started to yield optimize. So that now it's much more of a black box than before with quality score. But I mean, at least in the beginning, we sort of knew, it's mostly the predicted normalized yield that it's going to optimize around. And so it was very hard for a new entrant into the shoe space to go up against Nordstrom and Zappos, right?
Sure.
So, and that's still true, but it's just become much more of a black box now. Are there any things coming down the pike? Obviously, there's we get a new shiny object in the digital marketing world almost every month. Sometimes from an existing vendor, sometimes it's something new. Particularly within social. Social, I think, has been much more dynamic with regards to new entrants in comparison to search, right? Which I'm not sure that either one of us would have predicted 10 years ago that there'd be something called TikTok, right? That would suddenly be go from 0 to 200 miles an hour in no time. So, there any things coming down the pike that you're particularly excited for with clients on the social side, on programmatic, on OTT?
just on the social side for a second, I'm not sure this totally answers your question, but I'm fascinated by just how if you're really creative and smart and can figure it out, you can create a brand in social very, very quickly if you have it together and have a strategy and can build audience and everything else. I mean, just top of mind example, I'm at Lifetime Fitness at Boca that I've been at forever, for years and years. And I'm with my 17-year-old, and he points to the guy over there. You see that guy on whatever machine, and he had tattoos top to bottom. He looked like he was intense. And my kid goes, that guy's got 6 million followers on YouTube. I mean, on Instagram. I'm like, who is he? How do you do that? It's fascinating to me. And I think that, brands, as they evolve and as they open up and buy into more of being personalities and doing things that, if it's a brand that fits with an audience that's using social, I think there's huge opportunities today to create campaigns, to create awareness, to get a viral thing going that can help your brand tremendously. And a lot of that today at the end of it all is affiliate marketing, because you're getting your stuff pushed out there through influencers and things like that. But there are genuinely ways today to create something out of nothing if you're creative enough and have a good idea.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. Certainly on the both on the individual pieces of content, you've got these home runs or these blockbuster pieces of content. Even within somebody with a lot of followers, if you look at the distribution of the popularity of their posts, either in YouTube or Instagram or whatever, there's like an 80-20, 90-10 distribution, even for those people who've made it, right? And then of course, if you look at the influencers themselves or people who've made a name for themselves, it's that same power curve, right? Where either lightning strikes and they're just lucky, or there's a bunch of skill to it. Obviously, a lot of them have significant charisma, right? Not that they're necessarily like models. It's really more like a charisma thing, really. I think there's some kind of magnetism that certain personalities online have created, and it's turned into cash for them in a very different way than it would have 20 years ago, right? This is really sort of, they tend to either float to the top or rocket to the top, and it's sometimes difficult for agencies or third parties to sort of point as to why. In many cases, it's just
it's creativity. But it's also commitment, because just like everything else, if you're not feeding the machine, you're going to get forgotten. I mean, we both know people, I'm sure, that have a good following on Instagram or whatever channel and are able to keep it going. But it's a full-time job just to put stuff out there that people are going to engage with. So for brands, for organizations, not the individual person, you really need to figure out if you're serious about it and you're willing to make a commitment. And you got to put the resources in, both to just continuing to feed the machine, but also the strategy and the research of knowing what you should be doing to connect properly with your audience. And that could be in a B2B setting too. That's not limited to just, some consumer thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to that point, we've certainly seen brands that we've been pitching or we try not to let it happen to clients, but where they sort of dipped their toe into a social channel and then abandoned it because it was too much work.
Right.
And explaining to them that it doesn't look good if you're not keeping up with it, right? So you sort of have to decide, are you in or you out, right? With a particular social channel. And just like they continue to think public relations is worthy of investment on the sort of old school PR side, they have to sort of realize this is another form of earned media, and you have to invest in it.
You have to invest in it, and you have to give it time to sort of do its thing in order to see results, because the people that tried wham and expect the phone to ring the next day, it doesn't work. And to me, the hybrid between the Instagram craziness and just the basic web stuff is a company's blog, right? So if I'm looking at a company, whether it's somebody that is looking to work with us or just in general looking at a company, I tend to look at their blog very early on in my process. And if their blog hasn't been updated in months, that says a lot to me about where their head is and where their beliefs are and the degree to which they're going to be committed to doing what needs to be done in order to thrive organically.
Absolutely. And that therein lies one of the big questions that probably both of us get from CMOs of mega companies all the way down to the M's of SMBs, or we don't deal that much with the S's of SMBs, but the sort of earned media versus paid media budget allocation question, right? Obviously, with paid media, you may hate the return you get because it's so competitive, but at least it's predictable, right? Whereas the level of investment that's required to make earned media really work for you across social, across content, et cetera, you could be investing for a year before you start to really
Yeah,
see the
right.
trajectory, right? So that makes the budgeting decision even more challenging, right? Because you can't promise results, but you can basically say if you don't do it, you're definitely going to lose.
Right.
So
And like LinkedIn, for example, right? So LinkedIn, has lots of opportunities for thought leadership that I think are super valuable. And you can buy ads on LinkedIn too, and you can pay. And LinkedIn today is very, very expensive, more so on a cost per click basis than Google for most B2B competitive keywords that we see anyway. So you often run a situation where an organization confuses, paid and earned, and as a result of not seeing anything working well in paid in LinkedIn, and I'm not suggesting that's the case, but then they may have less interest in trying the social side of it too. But at the end of the day, you need to be doing both.
absolutely, absolutely. The other really fun thing with content, and I think we both have a significant percentage of B2B clients, is like a lot of times the marketing teams at B2B clients think they're in a boring industry and like there's no good content. And sort of the brainstorming process of getting them through thinking through all the things that they can create content around is actually sort of fun
It's
because
endless, right? Yeah.
yeah, obviously for their industry, a lot of people are actually very excited about some of the details of how to do things or best practices. And then there's all sorts of sort of tangential or tertiary content around, how their service or how their product gets used by their buyer, right? Because if they're B2B, you can't ignore that. So, luckily, I think, your team and my team have job security for quite some time.
That's good. One of the things one of my favorite activities is like walking a factory floor, right? Going to see a client in who knows where and just seeing what they do and watch something being produced, whether it's a semiconductor or a tire or anything in between. And you and I spend an hour in somebody's building and we're going to come up with 50 ideas of things that they could do content wise that is right in front of them that, can be done easily if you just put a little time and energy into it.
Absolutely. And I constantly have to remind people that YouTube is the second largest search engine, right? And video content tends to be the last thing they think of. And, the great thing about that is if factory floor or similar situations like that, they essentially create simultaneously a video asset. And obviously, if you transcribe it or talk about it as well, now you've created a textual asset as well. So, luckily camera equipment, everyone has a decent camera right on their hip now, right? So,
and then the other thing, Kevin, sorry to jump in, but is like, it used to be really a pain in the ass to transcribe something. Today, is online services. You hit a button, you give them the file, the audio file, and it's done.
Absolutely.
And just the concept that you could take a video interview or an audio interview and turn it into a blog post, essentially without with any meaningful effort, is a missed opportunity in so many places today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we could probably go on for days, but in the interest of time, for those listening, we want to sort of wrap things up. Any final pearls of wisdom that you've got for a digital marketer today?
Just because something is a small issue doesn't mean it's not cumulatively significant in the bigger picture. Little things on your website that aren't as tweaked as they could be, whether it's doing conversion rate optimization, whatever it is that you need to do in order to just make your online presence as spot on as possible, I think requires more energy than most companies do. And I think that's a function of just sort of exasperation at the end of the day, to your point when we started, that it never ends. But whether you do it in-house or you hire, an agency to help you, there's ways to do it right if you're willing to commit.
Absolutely. And I agree. Having that external wisdom combined with the internal, desire is really key.
combo.
Great, great. Thanks so much. And we'll keep in touch.
Appreciate it very much.